Hi everyone, welcome to the Sports Psych Show. Today I'm talking with basketball coach Brian McCormick. Brian is a professional basketball coach, he's a consultant and a clinician, and he's coached all over the world, in Denmark, in Ireland, in Sweden. He's taken teams to Denmark's first division. He's coached at CYO level, AAU, high school, junior college, and college basketball in the United States, which is where he's coaching now with Broward College. And he's got a mixed background. He's worked as a strength and conditioning coach for 2 junior college basketball programs. He's directed clinics, again, in a range of countries, in Canada, in China, in Greece, in Ghana, in India, in Trinidad and Tobago, and throughout the United States. He's also spoken around the world. He's completed his PhD in exercise and sports science at the University of Utah. And he's had several peer-reviewed papers published in the International Journal of Exercise Science, International Journal of Sports Science and Coaching, and the Strength and Conditioning Journal. He's also written quite a few books, one of which is absolutely fantastic. I downloaded it the other day, and I read it from front to back in a day. And got a lot from it, and that's the 21st Century Basketball Practice. As I say, he's written a few, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of them in this conversation. Brian, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Now, I was when I was doing some research for this conversation, I follow you on Twitter and really enjoy your tweets, and I paid quite close attention to your pinned tweet, which is a bit of footage from a basketball coach, quite a prominent basketball coach called Mike Dunlap. And I'm going to blow your trumpet here and just tell everybody what Mike said about your book, because it's a bit of footage from a clinic that Mike Dunlap gave. And he said that his book made him do the clinic that he had just done better because it challenged conventional thinking. I think what he was trying to say is that it was challenging his conventional thinking and he was promoting the notion of the importance of challenging conventional thinking, which I know your book, The 21st Century Basketball Practice, aspired to do that. So it was certainly an inspiring piece of coverage. I really enjoyed what you had to say.
Yeah, it was. Somebody sent that to me, and so it was nice to see that. I wasn't at the clinic and didn't know of that. So yeah, it was good. It was good when somebody forwarded that to me, and so I figured I would put it up and hopefully sell some more books. Did it sell a few more books? I don't know if it's directly related. The books sell okay. I don't know what good is for selling self-published basketball coaching books. I don't know what I should aspire to. Probably a few less than J.K. Rowling books. Probably a few less than Harry Potter. Possibly a few more than a soccer psychology book, maybe. But look, it's great to have you on, and I know we've been trying to do this for such a long time, and we've been following each other's work for quite a bit of time, and I really love your approach to basketball coaching and read your blog a lot, and I actually really just to get started, because I do want to base this conversation on your book, The 21st Century Basketball Practice, because I loved it so much, and I know there's going to be so much that the audience can take away from talking about the book. But I read an article you recently did on your blog, at least I think it was a recent article, about flow or the zone, but I think predominantly about flow and practicing in flow, and how it sort of compared when you were growing up. You said that when you were growing up in middle school and you were
practicing, or just playing, I should say, just playing with friends in the park, on the basketball court in the park, and getting pick-up games, as you would call it, and how much you enjoyed that, and how much you actually learnt from those pick-up games, and just the fun of it and the challenge of it put you into this state of flow where you kind of forgot everything that's going on around you, and you just focused exclusively on the game and the plays and improving and trying to win, and compared that to the what almost sounded quite dull, repetitive nature of the drills and activities you were doing in structured practice sessions, whether that was at high school or middle school or at your local club. So I thought that was fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that. Is that something that you try to create in your own coaching sessions, is helping players achieve a flow state?
Well, I mean, I guess I would hope so. I think the article, it references, I'm off the top of my head, I think it's Stephen Kotler's book, yes. Superman.
Yeah,
or The Rise of Superman, I think. And so that's kind of where I, took a little bit of the basic idea from that and then reflected back on growing up. And I guess, I know a lot of people that, the two of us follow on Twitter and stuff talk, semi-regularly about, the difference between, organized team sports and skateboarding. Tends to be the one that's picked out a lot. And that if we really wanted to get people, to stop skateboarding, we just need to get them coaches and, have coaches up on the half pipes telling them what to do. And then we'd have, fewer skateboarders and stuff like that, because that's one of the things, typically, we look at it as, the free play, and they're going and they're helping each other and working together and so on and so forth. That's one of the things I took and hopefully wrote about or expressed in that article is, I think a lot of times once we get into organized sports, and especially once you get on a team with a coach, and there's this idea that, the learning only happens when the coach is there and the coach is, kind of directing the activity. We ignore, what can happen, through free play or through, semi-directed activity, things like that. I get a kick out of coaches who I speak to and they reminisce about how they learned to play basketball. And a lot of what they reference is, I used to go out and play on my own, and I used to go out and play pickup games in the neighborhood, and I used to, do these kinds of things that were primarily self-directed, and self-initiated, and that helped them to develop as players. And they think of it as, kind of the ideal. And then their answer is, well, because that's kind of absent in childhood now, we need more training. We need more, individual training with basketball players to make up for this kind of free play that we're missing. And, I don't see kind of the similarity between, individual session with a coach, giving feedback on every single repetition that a player, takes compared to free play. And I think one of the major differences there is, I think in that kind of an individual session, it's very hard to achieve kind of that flow idea or state or state of mind, because, if you look at, just thinking of that individual session as deliberate practice and using the strictest terms that, Erickson kind of uses to define deliberate practice, one of them is that it's not supposed to be enjoyable, whereas, in a flow state, it is enjoyable, and you want to continue, and there's you lose the the sense of time, and you're completely engaged and immersed in that activity. And so they're kind of, when we're talking about the flow state in terms of practice, we're essentially aiming for the same goal in terms of developing skills and improving performance and so forth. But in a lot of ways, coming at it from kind of this flow idea versus a deliberate practice idea are two different sides of the coin. And I think too often adults defer towards the deliberate practice side, and yep, this is serious, this is hard, it's coach directed, there's lots of feedback, there's a stated goal, we know exactly what we want to achieve, that's the way you're supposed to get better at something, and we ignore what we used to do as children when we learned a lot of skills on our own, and skills that tend to persist over time that we learned, just playing around and having fun and enjoying the experience so that we want to continue. And there's a time and place for both, I think. But especially with children, I really, try to get more towards the flow or the, kind of free play, because ultimately, to me, and Erickson even says this, most everybody ignores this part of what Erickson wrote, but he said that before you engage in deliberate practice, you really need to have a passion for what you're doing, because it's so hard to engage in that kind of concentrated effort. And so to me, the flow and the free play is the way that you really develop that passion, and then eventually you get to the level where, yes, the deliberate practice is necessary if you want to take yourself to the next level or a higher level or whatever. But I think we need to recognize that skills can and do develop in kind of this free play or less structured environment. And it doesn't, just because a coach is there doesn't mean that a player is learning and improving. And just because a coach is not there does not mean that the player can't learn and improve.
As you're speaking there, I'm always thinking, you've mentioned deliberate practice, and as Erickson, I'm thinking their deliberate play, Jean Cocteau's work, the French-Canadian scientist,
right.
Getting that balance between deliberate play and deliberate practice. And I tell you what, I really want to pause on that idea and come back to it, because it's something that fascinates me just as a coach, that craft of getting the balance between the two. But you've mentioned that word environment, you nestled it into what you said there, and I know that in your book, The 21st Century Basketball Practice, you start, chapter 1 is about the practice environment, and you're alluding there to coaches being present, not being present. And so obviously the presence of a coach is going to skew the practice environment, and the beliefs the coach has about his or her people, and specifically their beliefs about their players, is going to make a big difference to the practice environment, isn't it? So deliberate play, deliberate practice, does that almost start with the practice environment a coach is creating?
Yes, I agree. And I think there's a tendency, to think that to be a good coach, your practice has to be organized and kind of coach directed. That's, typically, if you walk into a practice and you see, children just running around the gym and they look out of control, you can be like, well, what's the coach doing? Like, why is this isn't why I signed up for sports, was to have my, son or daughter just running around, messing around or whatever, even if they look like they're having, the best time ever, that's not why I signed up for organized sports, So I think we definitely, kind of err in that direction. And I think because of, the pressures around coaching, even at the youth levels now, and the expectations and kind of, other parents watching, even if you're, a parent volunteer coaching a team, you have other parents watching you, and then you have your own ego involved that, you don't want to look like a failure or like you don't know what you're doing. And I think it becomes difficult to move away from, whatever we perceive as the proper way to coach. And I think a lot of times, those perceptions are built on, images that we see on TV, whether, a training session that's, you see 2 minutes of a training session on TV, highlights, or whether it's, what's portrayed in movies, or TV shows that tends to be, very general and very not realistic. So, we try to live up to these kind of standards instead of just worrying about, well, what does this group of children need? How can I best engage this group of children? To make it, like, sports should be fun. First and foremost, I think. And I think too often we get away with that, or get away from that. And there's too many coaches that I see that, they go so far as to even brag that, well, my practice isn't fun. I'm like, well, what are you doing then? Like, why would I want to play for you if you're intentionally trying to make the environment not fun? there's a time and place for hard, and there's a time and place, once you get to certain levels where certainly you have to take conditioning seriously, and you have to have players prepared to play in games and so on and so forth. But, I think, you can still enjoy what you're doing and still create an environment where the players enjoy what they're doing. And I would hope that players who play for me, at my level, I have, junior college level here. So girls are here for 2 years, and then hopefully they're moving on to an NCAA school for a scholarship. So, most of my girls are motivated by, a lot of them are internally motivated, but they have a definite external motivation. They're trying to get college paid for within these 2 years. And so they have a short window to accomplish that goal. But I would hope that they still, enjoy coming to practice, and that what we do, it might not be fun every single day, and some days might be harder than others, but generally I would hope that they think that most of what we do is at least fun or enjoyable, or at least not boring or painful, to be a part of. That's just my goal is, if what we're doing is no longer fun or enjoyable, like, to a certain extent, why, beyond just getting college paid for, why else are you here? Like, there's probably easier ways to get college paid for than, spend 4 hours a day engaged in, basketball activities if you don't like what you're doing. And then you go to lower levels, and to me it should skew even more so. I don't know what we're doing when, 10 or 11-year-olds are quitting sports because practice isn't fun. Like, what are you doing? Like, why isn't it fun? What's so important that we can't enjoy what we're doing when we're, playing a game?
I love what you say in the chapter about the attitude a coach has towards his or her players mediates who holds the power. So often a coach can see people in very simple terms here, in good or bad terms. I believe in these players. I think they're good people. I think that they want to be the best that they can be. Or I don't think much of these people. I'm the one who's got to motivate them. I'm the one who's got to empower them. And I love what you say about having as a coach an empowerment approach. Empowering players to take responsibility, asking them the most appropriate questions, having them set their own tasks, asking them what they want to do, where the areas they feel that they need to work on. And you describe this as creating 2 basic learning environments. And why I like this so much, Brian, is I've never really, I don't know, perhaps I haven't read enough books. I've read quite a few, but you've described this as 2 basic learning environments: an educative environment and a training environment. And the educative environment is when you as a coach co-create options and possibilities, whereas the training environment is all about, it's a response to mistakes. It's a very narrow kind of, let's correct and let's respond to these mistakes. So I think certainly an answer, and it's not the whole answer, but it strikes me that we're pretty much on the same wavelength, whereby fun and participation happens as a consequence of this empowerment, this educative approach.
Yeah, I would. I believe that I got that from, I think he's a soccer coach named Larry Paul, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yep, I know Larry.
So I think he's got a video on YouTube. I think that's where I got the educative versus training terms from. And I really like that idea, and I do. I see that as an important difference. And also coupled like the seeing people as good and bad. I think that's from an old Harvard Business Review article that talked about Bob Knight versus Coach Krzyzewski from Duke University. And I do, as I coach and I watch other coaches and stuff like that, I think you can see who trusts, their players and who doesn't, and who is really trying to improve players by building skills versus improve players by reducing mistakes. And I think, the higher the level, I think the tendency tends to be towards erring on reducing mistakes, and that tends not to be what we do here. I think some people probably watch my team and watch our practices and wonder what I'm doing, because I've got, the easy one in basketball is, at most levels, your coach is yelling at your big players, pass the ball to a guard, pass the ball, stop dribbling, pass the ball to a guard. All right. So to me, that's the training environment. So, instead of trying to develop that player's dribbling skills, we're going to give it to the player who's already good at dribbling, thereby reducing the mistakes that we could make by trying to develop a new skill. And so for us, we commit a lot of turnovers, and part of the reason we commit more turnovers than we should is because, everybody on my team pretty much has freedom to try things. And it may or may not hurt us in terms of our overall record or potentially, how successful we are. But, I also look at my job at a junior college. My first job is to get these girls moved on to the next level with scholarships. And so, to me, development is first and foremost. And so I really try to create, the educative environment where we're not trying to improve by reducing actions. We're trying to improve by expanding options. And so that means if somebody who's only good with their right hand now, instead of saying, well, don't use your left hand, we say, no, you've got to practice your left hand. If you're not a good shooter, it doesn't mean, okay, I don't want you shooting threes. It means, no, you've got to improve your shooting if you want to play. These are the things that, instead of trying to hide weaknesses, we're trying to develop additional strengths, or at least develop weaknesses into competency. And that's just the way that I try to go about things, especially practices, and then, feeding on to games. And one of the things we have to learn is, there's a time and a place, and, in the last 2 minutes of a close game, that's not when we want to try something brand new. But, in most games and first halves and stuff like that, by all means, I had a 6'3" center get here last year, and, I think most people would put her under the basket and tell her, stay here. But, I saw her shooting, free throws, and I was like, you're a good shooter. By next year, I want you shooting threes. Like, you got to be able to make threes next year. And that was like literally our first practice, because, she's big and strong, and she's got decent form from 15 feet. So there's no reason she can't step 4 feet further back and shoot threes. So, that's something I want to develop.
That's really interesting. So let's pause on that player, because I think my first comment there is, and I'm certainly not an expert on the college basketball system, but I'm guessing that's quite a brave and what could be construed as a brave and bold move from a college coach, because it's, as you say, as you go up the age groups, as you go up the levels, we become more outcome oriented, and I'm guessing your bosses are more outcome oriented. So it'd be great to get a response from you on that one. And I suppose my second point or question is, what response did you get from that girl, that player? I'm guessing that player had always been told to just stand under the basket. So how did that player respond? And how did you deal with that player's response? So the bravery first and then the response.
Excuse me. I think in terms of the bravery, I think it depends a little bit. I think coaches are moving more so towards acceptance of, I guess, less traditional roles, I think, if you look at the NBA, that's probably helping, when you have guys like, Kevin Durant and Dirk Nowitzki and stuff that are basically 7-footers shooting threes. It's now more accepted that, taller players actually can shoot. So why not let them? So I think it's not as brave as it might have been 5 or 10 years ago. But I also think, colleges are a little bit slower to adopt that than, the professional level. And I think women's basketball, to a certain extent, is probably a little bit slower than, some of men's basketball to accept it. You tend to see a little bit more post play in women's basketball than in men's basketball. And like I would say, the post play in the WNBA is definitely better than it is in the NBA. But with the exception maybe of, a couple players like Elena Delle Donne, there aren't as many taller three-point shooters, as there are, with somebody like Durant and Nowitzki and stuff like that, where it's more and more common. So I don't know if it's that brave anymore, but to me it was more looking at her from, both her personality and her skill set and saying, well, she doesn't really want to be, banger inside, so why try to make her into that? She has some skills here. Let's see if we can build around these skills and what she seems to enjoy doing and what she tends to want to do. And so I think, at first I think there was a tiny bit of reluctance from her, just because, she just hadn't shot threes before. But, I just kept telling her, just keep shooting. Like in practice, just keep shooting. She doesn't shoot a lot. She's made a couple this year, but, I talked to her this morning at practice and I told her that she needs to shoot, that if she catches the ball there, that if she's open, shoot it. But it is, with some players, it's a slower process than others in terms of adopting new roles and stuff like that. So, I wouldn't say it's been a quick transition or that she's an expert shooter now or anything like that. But, she dribbles the ball. She handles the ball against pressure. She dribbles up in transition, and you can kind of hear people outside the team watching going, pass it to a guard or pick it up or stop, because, it's not exactly what you would expect if you watched her play, that she would take the ball the length of the court, off the dribble or something like that. So I think other people tend to get nervous watching it, but it's something that I expect her to do. So things like that, and it's something that I want her to continue to improve. So I don't if she takes off with the dribble, great. Everybody else, somebody get open. That's the way we play.
Would you say I'm potentially right in saying that you as her coach have given her permission to miss those 3-pointers, but it's now to really see that behavioural shift? It's potentially herself giving her giving herself permission to miss. And also, from a socially constructed perspective, it's giving herself permission to miss in front of her teammates. So that perception of what her teammates might think of her.
Yeah, I would say, especially with this particular player, I think, there's a lot of kind of social things going back before she got here, but certainly I think the disappointing her teammates part is a big one for her, and even more so than giving herself the ability or the opportunity to miss. I think it is more the peers and not wanting to let the team down for her particularly.
And do you think your stock in trade as a coach is skill development, then obviously leading to competitiveness? But do you think, let's pause on that notion of I feel I'm being judged, the notion of self-sabotage, all these sort of psychological constructs. How much do you think that impacts on skill development, that player psychology?
I think it has a big impact, not just on her, but on every player. This year, after talking to the team last year, I used one of my assistant coach positions this year to hire a sports psych consultant. So, I have 2 paid assistant coaches, and one of them is, a basketball coach, and one of them is a sports psych. And unfortunately, she's been dealing with illness and 2 knee surgeries, so we haven't seen her as much as we would like. But she's trying to help them, just on the off the court psychological, through doing some presentations and meetings and texting them and so on and so forth. Trying to attack them from that standpoint. So I think that's a big deal. She's also one of the 2 players that I used some of the stuff from Soccer Tough.
Okay.
That's the name of your book, right?
It is, yes.
I used a couple of things from there with her and with another girl. The stopping the negative thoughts.
Yep.
What is it? The ants.
The ants. The automatic negative thoughts.
Yeah. So I used a little bit of that with her earlier in the season, and with another player as well. Just trying to get them to come up with something, like you say, to kind of just reframe their thoughts and not allow their mind to drift into negative thoughts, but to constructively use self-talk. Because I there's the 2 pieces. There's the actual skill development, but then there's all the performance of the skills or the transfer of the skills to the game. And I definitely see some players who perform much, much better during practice than they do during games. And I think in some cases there are some physical things that contribute to that, both the speed of the game and the difference in a lot of our opponents versus our team. But I also think there's a certain psychological element, especially with a couple of them, and I think it goes back to where they were before coming here and the way that coaches interacted with them, and kind of how that shaped their self-conception, and what their role should be and how they should play the game is to a certain extent still dictated by previous coaches and the feedback and comments and behaviors of their previous coaches, and I've been trying to move them in different directions and allow them to feel a little bit more freedom, but I think there still is that built up somewhere in the recesses of their mind that does hold them back in some cases.
It's interesting because, again, coming back to reading your book and skill development, so the relationship here between skill development and then obviously skill execution under pressure, and the psychological side of that. I think it's chapter 3, you talk about skill development occurs when coaches design practices that induce errors. And it strikes me that this isn't just a truism in terms of developing skill, so that players can have insight and creativity and come up with their own solutions through those errors, but also when you design practice activities that are error strewn and players are kind of creating different solutions, it also helps them to practice psychologically dealing with errors.
Right. Yeah, I mean, most of my focus there is, to me, if you do something you've already done, you're not developing anything. So when you start something new or try to change something or improve something, there's naturally going to be errors because you're not good at what you're trying to do now. Yep. And then, but I agree. Part of that is then also learning how to manage those errors. And it's one of the reasons, I think one of the debates in coaching is, how often or when to stop practice when there's an error. In a couple recent coaching podcasts I listened to, they talked about, as soon as there's an error, we stop it and we restart and we fix it. And I can see the validity in that, But I also, from my perspective, most of the time I delay because in a game I can't stop it. In basketball I can stop it a couple times. I have 5 timeouts that I can use. So 5 times I could stop. As soon as I see an error about to happen, I could call timeout and save my team from making that error. I can do that 5 times a game. But the rest of the time, I can't. And if every time we mess up a play in practice, I immediately stop it, we never figure out, when it goes wrong in the game, what do we do when it goes wrong? Because coach stops it every time in practice, so we only get from A to B, and then we mess up B, so then we start at A again. But in a game, we go to A to B and we mess it up, but, the possession doesn't end, unless we gave the ball away. But maybe somebody set the screen or went to the wrong area or cut to the wrong spot or we're, in the wrong positions. Well, how do we fix the error? How can we get back to what we want to do and whether we continue and just kind of replace ourselves or whether we move on to something new, what happens? Do we just stop playing? Do we back it out and just have one person, go one-on-one and hope to get a shot? Or can we figure out what to do now? And so that's one of the major reasons why I don't, when we're scrimmaging, I don't stop it a ton because I want players to figure out, what to do. What do you do when something goes wrong? Because, to me, one of the things that I try to tell teams a lot is it's not the first mistake that hurts you, it's the second one. We're gonna miss a shot, but if you miss a shot and then walk back on defense and they score, that's what hurts you. Or if one of my pet peeves is you get frustrated because you miss an easy shot, you miss a layup, the other team gets a rebound and they foul you, and the person who missed the shot fouls right away. Well, it's not the missed layup that beats you; it's the foul that compounds the first error. So it's things like that. And if you stop it every time there's a missed shot or whatever, then we don't learn how to react to mistakes. I used to do a drill all the time. I 1-on-2 used it for dribbling, so one offensive player against 2 defensive players. And as soon as the defense stole the ball, I'd stop the drill, and they'd walk off the court, and the attacker would be mad that they got the ball stolen, and they'd walk to the end of the line, and the next group would go. And finally, I was like, well, that's not what's going to happen in a game. You can't, commit a turnover and put your head down. So then I made it, it becomes a 1-on-2, 2-on-1, and they play as many possessions until I tell them to get off the court. And that could be 1 possession, 2 possessions, 3 possessions, whatever. Because I wanted, with that specific team, when I kind of changed the drill, was because, I wanted that team was putting their heads down too much after mistakes and not staying in the game. And so we were doing this drill, and I was allowing them to do the same thing in the drill. And so I got rid of that. I was like, nope, 1-on-2, you commit a turnover, you got to get back and play defense. That's exactly what's going to happen in a game. You commit the turnover, you should be the first person getting back, and playing defense and trying to stop them from scoring or try to stop them from getting an easy basket. So, it's things like that. I think oftentimes in our best intentions to coach and to correct mistakes, maybe we correct the mistake, but then we don't develop the skill on how to actually handle the mistake in the course of a game. And oftentimes I think that's the more important skill.
It's interesting, just as you were kind of summing up there in that final sentence I was writing, coaches stopping play to correct players might make themselves feel better, but actually they prevent their design from being representative. And so
right.
That transference to game, they lessen. They might make themselves feel better, but they lessen the chance of transference.
Right. And, like I said, it's you may fix one problem, but then create another. Like if, maybe I, fix the pass that she was going to make, or the technique of the pass because, when she threw the ball, she threw it one way, and if she'd thrown it a different way, it would be better. And so maybe I can get her to throw the right pass, but maybe the more important skill isn't that she can throw the right pass, but it's, okay, well, if I committed that turnover, what do I do in a game? Do I stop? Do I think about what mistake I just made? Do I think about the pass I should have thrown? Or do I move on to the next step and I play defense? And I stop the transition, or I pick up the ball or whatever. Because the mistakes are going to happen in the game. Like, nobody plays a perfect game, and I think, one of the things, as I reflected on coaching and so forth and in, writing the books and so on, I think too many coaches obsess over trying to have perfect possessions and perfect games. And I think I differ because I know we're not going to be perfect, and I don't try to have a perfect possession. I try to, at every moment, what I want players thinking is, what's the best decision that we can make right now? Something may have already gone wrong on this possession, but what can we do now to move it back in the right direction? As opposed to, nope, we made a mistake, let's start over because it needs to be perfect. Nope, we made a mistake, let's start over, it needs to be perfect. I want them to continue on and figure out, well, okay, it's not perfect, but how can we make it good instead of bad? How can we make it a little bit better? What can we do next to solve the problem that made it not perfect? And I think, to a certain extent, I think that's probably the difference, in how I coach versus how a lot of other coaches, approach, whether it's feedback or drill design, stuff like that, is just this insistence on being perfect versus the realization that mistakes are going to happen, and how we handle the mistakes is probably more important in determining our success.
And it's interesting that you use the term perfect, because as a coach who, again, coming back to your book, you talk about constraints-led design, so very much constraining the environment or manipulating the environment to help players make decisions and acquire skill, if you like. Is there a perfect? I mean, as you're watching, as you're on the side of the court or in the middle of the court, and you're watching play unfold, and I'm talking about in a practice session here. I mean, do you have a picture perfect in your mind, or is there not a perfect? Is it that the players are just creating as they're doing it, or will you have something that you want to see?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think if we come down, and, our primary offense, if you will, is, we reverse the ball, we set a stagger screen for our best shooter to come off the screen and shoot a wide open shot. If we do those 3 or 4 things correctly, that's pretty close to, a perfect possession. We get the ball reversed, the timing is right, the screens are set, we get the player open. That's, to me, is pretty close to perfect. That rarely happens. And so what we spend more of our time is, okay, so we did this, we got to this point, we probably have a small advantage. Maybe we don't have a big enough advantage to get a wide open shot. We've got this small advantage. How do we keep that advantage and extend the advantage to get a big advantage somewhere else, as opposed to saying, oh, well, we ran the play to get, this shot from here. We didn't get it. All right, let's back it out. Let's start over and see if we can run it again. And that's basically my, more or less offensive philosophy, is we're going to run something quick to see if we can get, quote unquote, a perfect shot. If we don't get it, then we want to keep the ball moving and take advantage of whatever we did create out of that, quick little play, and, extend it until we get, something else, a great shot for us.
And when you're coaching on the run, are you a coach who, when you stop play, how are you interacting with the players? How are you correcting, if that's the right term, players? Are you doing that quite explicitly? Are you doing that by directing players' attention through questions?
It depends. Depends on the player, depends on the situation.
Okay.
I probably don't do as good a job as I used to in terms of questioning.
Why?
I think as I'm getting older, I'm getting less patient.
Okay.
But I mean, it kind of depends on the mistake and the player, especially.
Okay.
Some players, I'll ask, more questions. Some players, I just kind of, tell them what they need to understand in that situation. Like some of the mistakes, like just thinking of practice today, some of the mistakes are things that, our freshmen just haven't adjusted to our system yet.
Yeah.
And so it's more like, no, this is what we do. This is what you need to do when this happens. Versus some of the other mistakes are, with more experienced players or more kind of decision-making issues. So it's like, well, what'd you see? Why was that a turnover that time? What should you have done there? Where was the open player? Things of that nature. So I try to do both. Like I said, I'm probably not as good with the questioning as I used to be. But I probably also, a little bit of that is I probably give less feedback than I used to, and allow them to play a little bit more. I have a number of players on my team. They know when they make a mistake, and most of the time they know what they should have done. So I don't really need to say anything.
Yeah.
I don't need to prompt them. Like, it's just, if I am, then it's just to make me feel like I'm doing something. Like when my point guard turns the ball over, I don't need to tell her what she did wrong. She knows. So I probably say a little bit less just because of the team that I have, and consequently the instructions that I probably have reduced has been getting rid of some of the questions instead of some of the more explicit instructions. But it is something I think about, and I continually keep trying to get myself to do a better job asking more questions and not just talking.
Just moving on, in the book, a chapter I really liked, where you talked about something called the competitive cauldron. And I'm kind of testing your memory here, Brian, because I appreciate you wrote this book about 4 years ago, so I do apologise. And and just to all of the listeners, at no stage did I say to Brian, I didn't give him a heads up and go, well, I'm going to talk to you about this book, because I'm sure if Brian asked me about Soccer Tough, which I wrote 6 years ago, and quizzed me on that, I'd be like, I cannot remember what I wrote at all, but I can really. But you wrote about the competitive cauldron, and to help players become more competitive, the essence of the chapter was very much bringing a sense of competition into that practice environment, and very much a lot of head-to-heads, partnering up, buddying up for competition, that kind of social facilitation, if you like. Is that something you still use? I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts on that. 4 years later, do you still use that? What do you think of that when you reflect back?
I do. We actually discussed it today.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I use it a little bit differently than I potentially wrote about in the book.
Yep.
When I coached at the high school level, I used the results to determine starters, which I don't do now. Although, if I did, 4 of my 5 typical starters are the top 4 in winning percentage right now, and the same was true last year. It was almost always 4 of the top 5 were in the top 5. So it wouldn't change too much if I did use it to determine starters, but. I mean, it's something I don't talk about a ton with the team. They know that I keep track of wins. 1 or 2 of them even said today, they're like, I was wondering if you actually kept track of that stuff, or if you just, did it in practice to like make us think that you were or something. But I was like, nope, I've got all 14 weeks of practice so far. I've got wins and losses, your record. And so I showed them the records today because one girl was unhappy with playing time, so I wanted to show her where she stood in terms of winning percentage in practice, and stuff. So I use it. I mainly use it to see anomalies. whether on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, it's a pretty, small sample, so it doesn't really tell a lot. Weekly basis is still a small sample, and there can definitely be big anomalies, But, at the beginning of last year, there was a girl who subjectively I thought was not one of our better players, and for the first 2 or 3 weeks of practice, she was in the top 2 in, winning percentage. And so I saw that, and so I started to pay more attention to her to see what I was missing that, I didn't think she was playing very well, but her team seemed to always be winning. And as it turned out, I was correct. And eventually, once we got 4 or 5 weeks in, she was at the bottom, or near the bottom. So it was just kind of a 2-week, anomaly, or maybe she had a hot run for 2 weeks or whatever. But, it made me pay more attention because there was something that was different than what I was seeing with my eyes. And so that's kind of what I use it for is as a check, like, what am I missing? Like, why is this girl winning a lot when I don't think she's very good? Or why is this girl who I think is good, why isn't she winning more? And then I also like things like, injuries, nagging injuries. If a girl who usually is winning a lot has a really bad week, I check in with her a little bit more to make sure, that whatever nagging injury she has, it's not worse than I think it is, or, maybe, classes aren't going as well, and so she's a little bit out of it during practice. That's happened with one of our players, she's kind of out of it for a couple of days, and it was because she was worried about class, and another girl had a bad week, and I knew it was because her ankle was bothering her more than she would admit to, and stuff like that. So on a weekly basis, I can kind of use it to as a check. On a daily basis, there's not a ton of information, but over the course of time, once you get 3, 4, or 5 weeks of data, it tends to fit with what I'm seeing, and then it helps to confirm what I'm seeing. And then when players come and they want to talk to me about why they aren't playing more, then I can, look, it's not just what I see, but look, this is where you rank on our team, and if you think that you should be playing more than this player, then, in practice, guard her and beat her, win the game, and stuff like that. So I think it helps to give a little bit of objectivity to the decisions that we make as a coach. It's not perfect by any stretch. I do tend to worry about players worrying too much about their ranking and the wins and losses in practice, and potentially not exploring new things or trying new things because they're worried about, they're worried about where they rank and stuff like that. So that's another reason why I don't use it as a strict determination of starters, because I don't want them overly concerned to the point where they're, not trying new things, and I know with one of the players who's typically at the top, I've told her this year during certain games, like if we're playing 2-on-2 and she could probably score almost every time to make sure that she wins, I've told her, look, I want you, when you're matched up with this player, I want you passing the ball. I want you working on your passing, and I want her to get more shots as opposed to, I know you can score, I want her getting the shots when you're matched up with this player, and stuff like that. So, I occasionally force them probably to move beyond what would give them the easiest path to victory, especially with some of, the better players or the players that win the most. So there's different things I do, but I do worry about that. And occasionally, I won't set the teams and I won't keep track of who wins and who loses, just because I want there to be time where they aren't under that pressure and they really can explore and try new things.
It's interesting, as you were speaking there, I was thinking of two things. I was thinking, and I suppose my first thing is a bit of a question for you, which I'll ask you to answer in a second, but it sounds to me like you've got a measurement for competitiveness, which I think is fantastic. And I know I've been around environments where coaches have done something similar or the same, and they've sort of gamified their activities, and so subsequently come up with a chart, a table, a league, if you like, that competitiveness between players. And I just wondered if you'd seen a relationship. Obviously, you've got the ability of a player, and then you've got the outcomes they're getting for these activities, this competitiveness league or chart. So have you found over the last 4, 5, 6 years that you've used this system, have you found a relationship between competitiveness and ability? Are the more able players, do they win more games because they're also more competitive as a consequence of their ability, or the ones that you perceive, and it's a subjective thing I guess, the less able athletes or basketball players, sometimes they win because they're just more competitive, they have those competitiveness skills? And just so let's get an answer to that in a sec, but just reflecting back on what you said about I'm a bit nervous about using it because of, are my players going to be creative? And we come back to that deliberate practice literature, don't we? The Erickson stuff of, well, deliberate practice requires self-reflection, and that self-reflection, the ability to check in the moment, is going to, it's going to fill that working memory capacity, that frontal cortex, and when that's being filled, when I'm reflecting in the moment in a very quick, instinctive game, how was my pass there? Did I get my body shape right? Did I get the angle right? Then of course it's going to be I might see a performance atrophy there. So I completely agree with you. It's that tough balance to get between, I'm trying to help the competitive skills, but also I want my players to develop their skill, and that does require some self-reflection. So if you want to have a comment about that, great, but just that relationship between competitiveness and ability.
I don't know if I can quantify it as competitiveness necessarily, okay, but there are definitely players who kind of rank higher in terms of wins than their ability, that I would, and probably most coaches would tend to ascribe it to effort. Some players just play harder. Now, is that because they're more competitive? Maybe it's just their nature. Maybe they're just in better shape. I think with the one I'm thinking of, I think it's all three. I mean, she's probably in the best shape. She's probably more competitive. And she's probably just naturally somebody who works very hard at everything she does. So I think there are some players that probably outperform their skill level. And I think there are definitely players who underperform their skill level. Okay. That's probably easier to see.
Okay.
Is the underperformance. But I have one girl this year who's near the bottom, who shouldn't be near the bottom, and I had the same thing last year. And I think I would say it's a combination of, one being freshmen, so they're a year behind and younger and less mature and so on and so forth. But the effort level, they kind of probably haven't adjusted to the intensity of the college game yet, or quite as fast as some other players. It's probably a little bit of, the environment where they came from before here, stuff like that. But it's definitely apparent that there's and I don't think with them, I don't think it's necessarily a lack of competitiveness. With them, I would say it's more effort related than competitiveness, because especially the girl last year was maybe one of the most competitive girls on the team. She just didn't work very hard, and that's why she's not here anymore. But so I think it's tough to measure competitiveness with it. I think it more measures kind of probably ability times work or times effort.
Interesting. To finish us off, because I'm conscious of your time, but I'd be really interested to hear, I suppose my slightly cheesy question of the evening, is who is your most influential basketball coach? You could pick any coach of any sport, and why? What is it that they did that has influenced you, or you feel was an incredible thing to do, or an incredible way to coach?
You mean who I played for, or just in general?
Just in general.
Okay. Well, the first one would be probably John Wooden, just because I read his books when I was young, and I still like. I read Wooden's "They Call Me Coach" kind of biography when I was like in 3rd or 4th grade, and that I kind of wanted to be a coach after reading that book. And then my dad was my coach for a number of my teams when I was young, so that had a big influence on me wanting to become a coach. But in terms of basketball specifically, I would say the people who've influenced me the most are probably Mike McKay, who's director. I don't know exact title, but he works with the Canadian women's national team. I've been lucky. I've spoken at 3 or 4 clinics with him, and so I've kind of taken a lot of what he talks about, and so he's probably helped me. A guy named Jerome Green was my, my boss when I coached an AAU team when I was like 23, 24 years old. And actually his son was on my team, but he was kind of in charge of, or kind of above me within the AAU program. And he's one of the first ones who, like, I had just been a college assistant coach, and then I came down and I was coaching 9-year-olds in AAU, and I was trying to coach them like I was coaching college kids. And, lots of drills, lots of individual work, lots of feedback, more traditional coaching. And he was the kind of one that was like, they got to play. Like, they're 9 years old. They got to play. Like, they're not going to be able to make sense of these drills. Just let them play. And so he's probably the one that changed my thinking a lot. Just like that one conversation of he's like, you got to figure out how you can teach them what you want to teach them, but they have to play. And so a lot of what I still do comes from that season with 9-year-olds, that, based on that one conversation with Jerome. So he influenced me a lot. But I would say over the last, 5 to 10 years, probably the 2 biggest would be Mike McKay with Canada, and then Brianna Finch, who's an assistant coach at Barry University, because we talk so much. So we share a lot of the same philosophies, and so, I try to help her. She helps me. She's the one who I, probably on a daily basis bounce ideas off of, and, back and forth. So in that way, she's probably helped me as much or more than anybody. But I think I get a lot of ideas from Mike McKay's when I've listened to him talk, and then his writing, and now his tweets. He's got great tweets now that he does, like, hand drawings and then takes a picture of them and puts them on Twitter. And so I enjoy those immensely now.
Fantastic. And I just want to, before we finish, just take the opportunity to say thanks for writing the 21st Century Basketball Practice, because I've never worked in basketball, but what I loved about the book was that you really scaffolded that information and made it very simple. I'm passionate about demystifying sports psychology, as you know, and I think what you've done is you've taken some pretty complex topics in constraints-based learning and dare I use this term, ecological dynamics, and there's a lot of great podcasts talking about ecological dynamics and its various guys, and I think that the more we can simplify these methodologies for coaches, the better coaching communities will have. And I think you do that really, really well. So thanks for writing that. How can people find you, Brian, if you want to be found? Where can they read your blog, and how can they purchase one of your brilliant books?
Well, first, thank you very much. I appreciate those kind words. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty sure it's at Brian McCormick. That's pretty easy to find me. Website 180 Shooter, so the number is 180, and then Shooter, SHOOTER.com. It's probably the best website to find me. You can contact me through there. Books are, almost all of them are available on Amazon. Maybe all of them. Can't remember.
I think they are.
They're mostly available on Amazon. The ones that aren't on paperback on Amazon are on a site called lulu.com, lulu.com, because I do get emails asking for the paperback versions, and that's the easiest place to buy those. So, but thank you very much. Appreciate those sentiments.
No, thank you, and thank you for joining me. Well, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd really love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch. You can get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com. And please do tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Psych Show. If you've got any suggestions, let me know. I'm going to try and implement exactly what you say. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. I do hope you can join me. Bye for now.